Awesome. Alrighty, I believe we have the slide share. Perfect. I'm going to say quick introduction. You should only see 7 people, by the way, because this is a webinar. The people that you are shown on the screen are the panelists. They will be talking out and talking about things that they're passionate about and that they learned about. Most of them are students, which is really great because we're talking about transforming education. And so if you just see panelists, that's great. It means you're seeing who you need to see. If you don't see anybody, we will get to that in a little bit. Otherwise, thank you all for being here and listening in. If you want to keep putting your intro in the chat, by all means do. Otherwise, thanks for listening in today. And before we get officially started, I just want to bring attention to something that happened at South Whidbey recently. Taylor Daniels, a friend and a student at South Whidbey, passed away in a car accident on July 20th. And everybody in South Whidbey is sending love and support to his family and friends on South Whidbey, and there will be a celebration of his life this Sunday on August 2nd at 4 at the sports complex in South Whidbey. But thank you all for being here, and we are glad that you could be here even if you are mourning this loss. So on to the topic of what we're doing today. So we're going to move on to the topic of the webinar, Transforming Education. The world around us has been in flux for many years, and it's time for the school curriculum to reflect this changing times. And what we're going to be talking about is going into how the school could change, how it could do better, what the students want, and what we want to learn more about. So this is a really wide topic that we could all rant about for a long amount of time, but in the meantime, we're going to go into a quick Q&A at the very end if you have any questions for us. But first, we're going to introduce the panelists with our name, pronouns, affiliations, and what grade you're in. And I think we're going to have to do a little bit of rearranging of the slides. Derek, if you could go forward about 3, I believe. Awesome. So my name is Maggie Natras. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My affiliations are with USL, Social Justice Club at South Whidbey High School, and some protests that were going on in Freeland a little while back before quarantine. And I'm going into 11th grade. I'm going to pass it off to Annie and Claire.
Thank you, Maggie. My name is Annie Philp, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. My affiliations, like Maggie's, are with USL, South Whidbey Social Justice Club, and Whidbey Climate Strike. I will also be going into my junior year at South Whidbey High School. My name is Claire Philp. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm affiliated with USL, Whidbey Climate Strike, and Social Justice Club at South Whidbey High School. And I'm going to be going into 10th grade. And we'll pass it off to Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace Huffman, and I use she, her pronouns. And my affiliations are with USL, Fred Hutch. I don't know if that has anything to do with this, and I'm going to be a senior. And I'll pass it off to Molly.
Hello, my name is Molly Natras. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My affiliations are with USL, and my sister who started USL and had me join, Maggie. I am going into 8th grade next year. And I will pass it on to Derek. Have you gone?
Not yet. Hi folks, my name is Derek Hoshiko. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an organizer with forthepeople.earth and the Rapid and Just Climate Action Project, and supporting the United Student Leaders and the Social Justice Solidarity Network on Whidbey Island. And I will pass it to Paul, who's on the phone.
Hello folks, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, this is Paul Williams. My pronoun is he, his, and I have been an employee of the Suquamish tribe in the Fisheries Department since 1991, and I'm also on the board of E3 Washington with Derek and the Puget Sound Keepers Alliance. And I'll pass it to somebody else. I don't know who.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass it to Jackson, I believe.
Thanks.
I don't think we can hear you, Jackson. No, I think we're having technical difficulties for a second. Can you try again? I think we got you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm Jackson Murphy. I use he, him pronouns. My affiliations are with USL, and I'm going into 10th grade.
Awesome.
And who hasn't
Sharon?
gone?
Sharon needs to wrap it.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sharon Abreu. I run a small nonprofit here on Orcas Island called Irthlingz Arts-Based Environmental Education. So we use the arts to inspire and empower people to become active stewards of the earth. And I had the pleasure of meeting Derek on a webinar, and we started working together. So I feel very honored to be working with Derek and Paul and the students, and really, really appreciate being part of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so these are our panelists, and we're super excited for everybody to be here and talk about transforming education. Derek, if you could go back a slide, that would be amazing. So USL, which you probably heard a lot, is a coalition of students from across Whidbey Island. We used to have a couple students from Oak Harbor and Coopville who are on here, but right now our main base of supporters are on Whidbey, or South Whidbey rather. So everybody here is at least an honorary member, if not really important to us and what USL is doing. So we have been drafting a climate emergency declaration for the city of Langley. We've also been connecting with local banks to discuss how we can assist them with putting together a climate policy, or maybe strengthening the one that they have right now. We've done quite a lot of other things that are not on the top of my head right now. But more recently, we've been focusing on Black Lives Matter and also transforming education, which is why we're doing this webinar. Eventually, we want to get a series of webinars out about transforming education in all of those subjects that are important to us and what we're passionate about. And I'm so glad that everybody on here can be a part of this. We're going to go back one more slide and do a quick Zoom tutorial, because I do know webinars are a little bit different than Zoom meetings, but yeah, other way. There we go. Awesome. Derek, do you want to look over this real quick?
Sure. Hi, folks. So just want to share a couple of important points that can be very helpful for being on Zoom. When we're sharing screen in these slides, if you're on a computer, there's this grid view option, which will make it possible to see more than just the one or two people that you can see when it's on these other modes. So definitely click on the grid view on the floating window that has the cameras. And then when you're chatting, and we definitely encourage folks to chat, to change it from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. When you select all panelists, then other attendees aren't able to see what you've chatted. So both for us as presenters, but also for you all in the audience, please do use the all panelists and attendees when you're chatting. There's also a Q&A feature enabled. So when it gets to be question and answer time, please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A feature. It can easily get lost in the chat. So if you have a question, please use that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Derek. If you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat. It is a little bit busy right now, so we may not get to it right away, but if you put it down there, we might be able to help out. Alrighty, so this is our agenda for today. So we have a couple main topics with a lot of branches everywhere. So first view are how to connect and talk with people that have different views. That'll be presented by Sharon. Then we're also going to have how important climate change is in schools and why it isn't the main focus. That will also be done by Sharon. Then we're going to go on to human rights issues and scientific fact turned political. And Annie, Molly, Claire, and maybe a little help from me are going to go into those, as well as climate change, COVID-19, and how fact is now becoming partisan. Then we're going to go into Black history and how it is taught in our schools. That's going to be presented by Jackson with a little support from me and Claire. And that's going to go into hate speech and how LGBTQIA is incorporated, as well as just Black history, which is the main topic. Derek, if you could switch to the next slide. We're then going to go into culture and history studies with Claire, Annie, and Grace. So immigration rights, ethnic studies within the classroom, a petition that was sent out to South Whidbey High School, as well as women's studies, which will kind of be its own branch. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. And then lastly, state standards about the law. So schools especially have different standards that they have to keep. And we're going to go into how our school is maybe staying with those or not. And we're going to go into the law behind that. Then we're going to have a Q&A. This might run a little bit long, depending on how well I do my job as facilitator. So this is where you all can reach out to us and ask any questions that you have or give any input that you have. And hopefully it'll go really well. So we're gonna have some mini discussions in between all of these, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward, and we're super glad that you're here. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Sharon to start us off.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, are we going to go to the, oh, there we are, great. Okay, so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. How do we talk with people that we have different views with? Because this happens a lot in our society, and we don't have the skills to really talk with each other and connect. We're told, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, because people just get into fights, and there's some wisdom in that, but there are also things that are very important for us to talk about. So how can we learn how to do that and connect with each other and see where we might connect with each other and share information, because we're often getting lots of different kinds of information from different places, depending on who we're talking to, what our background is, what media we're tuning into a large part of the time. So the first thing here is listening. And I have really, really learned the value of this, because I tend to be the kind of person that wants to jump in and help. And I've really learned how just listening is so important. For example, well, I have two examples here. One is I was on a 3-hour airplane trip several years ago. I was sitting next to a guy who had a very different worldview than I did. I was flying from a conference in Orange County, California, to Washington, D.C., and I was trying to connect with this man. And what I had to do really was listen to him. And he was very angry. And he was not angry at me, but he had so much anger that just listening to what he had to say, even though I had differing viewpoints, was actually a very healing thing. He really got that I was genuinely interested in listening and hearing his point of view. And because of that, I was able to introduce different perspectives. And I think that is so just so very, very important right now, because we don't know how to listen to each other without getting triggered. And so I actually teach a practice called the connection practice, which very much involves empathic listening and being able to give empathy to another person, letting them know you've really heard them. Another example that I have is Daryl Davis. Now, I don't know if you've gotten to see Daryl Davis, but he is so inspiring. He is a jazz musician, professional jazz musician. He's a Black man who has spent years attending Ku Klux Klan rallies and talking with Klans people, and he actually has befriended some of them. I'm going to put some links in the chat because he is such an inspiring person. Talk about going out of your comfort zone to connect with people. You know, most of us would say just stay away, but I really think that what he's doing is providing a really powerful example for the rest of us. So that's just a very short overview of what we can do, and I would love to share techniques on how we can get more common-centered in ourselves to listen to things that trigger us, especially talking about climate change.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know this is just your first slide, but this is very important, especially within the school system. I know that our school is very liberal and has some folks that do not agree with that overall outlying standpoint, I guess. So I know that this is something that many of the students on here have personally experienced and dealt with. So thank you so much for sharing. If anybody wants to give any more input, please share out. Otherwise, I think we're going to move to the next main topic. Okay, Sharon, your next topic, go ahead.
Okay, so moving on from that, because it's actually a good segue, because climate change is still a very triggering topic. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, differing beliefs, and even without that, just the human mind, it's so hard for so many people to wrap their minds around the issue of climate change. And that's why I felt I needed to use the arts, because I felt like we needed to connect on a heart level. I could see all of the good information that was coming out over the last 20 years and more, just kind of bouncing off of people. So it's understandable that people would want to say, look, this is a hoax, or we're not doing this, or there's nothing we can do about this. You know, or it's you know, you hear different, well, we're being manipulated. You know, we don't like to be told we can't do things, especially in this country. You know, what do you mean don't have the freedom to do this or that? So I think we need to shift our mindset, but how are we going to do that if we can't connect with each other? And that's where climate change education comes in. I don't work in the public schools on a regular basis. I will go in and work with one class here and one class there on a particular project. So I don't have a handle right now on how much climate change education is being taught in schools and how much, in how many ways climate change might be taught in the schools. And that is something I would really love to see some studies on, and I'd like to have at least one webinar just on that. But from my point of view, it's imperative to talk about it. And if we have differing views, let's share why we have differing views. Let's share the information we're getting. Let's study it together. I think that is an excellent educational pursuit in itself, because climate change is an interdisciplinary issue. It covers so many topics. I've listed some of them here, and there are actually more, but just covering science, history, national and global politics, media, environment, social justice, worldviews, psychology, what motivates to believe something or something else, how fear is a big factor in what we might choose to believe. And the arts, well, I use the arts to connect around this issue, and I think it's wonderful to bring in writing and journaling and music and dance and all of the arts into processing around this issue and connecting with the general public as reaching out from schools. So, and also human health and food. I mean, it just touches on every single subject, agriculture. So that's one way I think we can really tie climate change in. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, which is very much related to climate change is the concept of just transition, which is something a lot of people still haven't heard about. The term is getting more into the public consciousness, but it's still something that people go, what is that? So basically what just transition is a way to transition people in our society. When we have certain types of things that are happening, we have people in lower income communities, frontline communities, communities of color that are suffering from different kinds of pollution. How can we transition those communities into healthier communities? How can we transition how we do things? So we have people that are being impacted by pollution, and we have people who are going to be impacted by those types of jobs going away. So just transition is a term that actually came out of the labor movement. I believe it was in the 1970s, early 70s. How can we actually help people that are working in fields, and union members in particular, who have pensions and they have retirement, and they're going to need a continuing education. They may have to relocate. Where are the funds going to come from for that? And how is the education going to be organized? And so that's basically what just transition is. How do we transition working people and communities so that nobody falls through the crack and nobody is unduly impacted by transitions that have to be made in our society that are inevitably going to be made? So we are going to have an upcoming webinar with Jeff Johnson, who works with the Blue Green Alliance, which is an alliance of environmental and labor organizations. And he's also the former head of the Washington State Labor Council. And I've heard him speak. He's really excellent. So let's find out what is and isn't being taught. Let's address the fears and resistance to climate change education and really plan to bring just transition in, at least specifically at the high school level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sharon. Derek also put some of the information on that webinar in the chat if any of you are interested. I cannot speak to that specifically, but if you want to talk a little bit more about that, by all means do. Alrighty, do we have any more input from anybody else on our panelists list? Okay, with that, we're going to move forward, I believe, to the next one. So, Molly, Claire, and Annie, if you want to start speaking up about this one.
Yeah, Claire, do you want to go ahead? Yeah. Okay. So we debate in many classes about lots of topics, some being political and others that are human rights issues and scientific facts, such as climate change. First off, scientific facts should not be brought up in the setting. When these topics are brought up, the debate then turns toxic and it forces students to decide.
Annie and Claire, just real quick, sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback from Paul's phone. Paul, is there any way that you can either mute yourself or...
I went ahead and muted him.
There we go. Awesome, thank you so much.
Okay.
I don't know how much everybody got of that. If you do want to start over, by all means do.
Yeah, sure, I'll just start over. So we debate in many classes about lots of topics, some being political and others that are human rights issues and scientific facts such as climate change. First off, scientific facts should not be brought up in the debate setting, but when they, along with human rights topics, are brought up, the debate often turns toxic and it forces students to choose a side depending on their, or rather their parents' political views. Also, scientific facts turn partisan when in reality facts are facts, and especially when it comes to climate change, which is such an urgent and present issue, we can't be taught that it is controversial. Climate change is rarely brought up at our school, and at least from my experience, it isn't part of the curriculum that I've been learning, unless the teacher goes above and beyond. And again, with it being such an urgent topic that affects everyone, it should be talked about quite a bit. Luckily, many of our teachers do go above and beyond and talk about climate change, but even then, not all teachers do. And since it's not part of the curriculum that they're meant to teach us, they're not getting paid for that. And we don't go as in depth as we should be going. So yeah, Annie and Molly, would you like to add on to that? Molly, do you want to go ahead? I can always
Yeah, I just adding on to that a little bit. The climate change is something that, so far in my experience, I just graduated from 7th grade, which is very impressive. And as the only middle school member of this panel, I would like to say that so far my experience has been very similar to yours, Claire, but we have learned very, very little about climate change in class. And it's mostly been, at least what I've learned has been from independent study, choosing to focus on that for a private project or deciding that that's something that I want to pursue on my own. And it's only from from teachers who are going above and beyond and deciding to tell us about what's going on in the world and trying to educate us beyond what the curriculum has tried, beyond the curriculum. And I had something else that I was going to say. I lost it. Annie, you can go. I'll say it after.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that is really important for students to understand is their carbon footprint. And right now, students don't have access to any resources in which they can record or track their carbon footprint and see how they are affecting the rest of the world, pretty much. I mean, I know that America has seen the impacts of climate change, but there are other parts of the world that have, seen devastating impacts more so than we have, and that is because of us and our carbon footprint. So just seeing and being able to track it yourself is extremely impactful when you're looking at the facts, because you can relate to them more. We also, in previous meetings, talked about how our school district turned away community members who were wanting to present on the topic of the climate crisis, and how other schools such as Oak Harbor and Cooteville welcomed them and they were able to present. So just seeing how it's become such a touchy topic, even in the science classroom, is really concerning. We also know that I think 50%, what was the statistic of teachers? Yeah, I think that was, we didn't fact check it, but yeah, a couple years ago there was a study done, and about 50%, I think, of science teachers did not still believe the climate change to be some sort of theory that they were continuing to work out. So that's also something to think about, and that's not fact checked, but it's scary to think that even 1% of our science teachers don't believe in climate change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Molly,
I figured it out. So also the topic that we're talking about on this webinar is transforming education. And all of us has pretty much said so far, only teachers who go above and beyond are teaching about climate change. And that's not in any way okay, because it's something that seriously affects our generation. It does seriously impact our day-to-day lives, and should impact our day-to-day lives even more, because there needs to be more change. And the fact that only a few teachers are deciding to teach about that is just, it's pretty disgusting in my opinion. And I've had pretty good teachers my entire career in school so far, but knowing that there are other teachers out there in not only our school district, but in other school districts that do not teach about that, and students can go their entire school careers or most of their lives without learning about climate change, is just terrible. Because if you don't learn about it in school and your parents won't teach you about it because they don't believe that it exists according to their beliefs, or whatever, or they just don't talk about things with you, or some reason, you could just go your entire school career without learning about climate change, and then you will not be able to help fight it, or to know that it's a problem at all, to make your own decisions about.
Yeah, absolutely. I do know that as somebody who is in the activism field, most of the problems that we have are stemmed from the fact that people are ignorant to something that they didn't actually know existed in the first place. And because of that, the problems that we have could have been solved by simply educating people further and past what either their parents or their teachers were willing to share with them. There are definitely parts of even the US or the world that just completely ignore that climate change is the problem, or maybe don't ignore that it is a problem, but ignore that humans are the ones that are causing it. And because of this, if we don't have an impact, if we don't change our own day-to-day lives, the impact of climate change will get even worse than it is right now. So this is definitely something that is very important to us as students, and as activists, and as people who are simply concerned about stopping this, because unless everybody knows this, or at least has the facts in front of them, nothing will be done. And I saw one comment here today, which was, who actually creates the curriculum that keeps climate change out of our schools? So that is something that we definitely want to focus on in later actions. How can we affect how climate change is being taught in school? How can we have an impact? Does anybody else have anything to add? Okay, getting a lot of shaking of heads. I think this is definitely just one section of an issue that is very large, but this is definitely important to us. I believe we're also going into COVID-19 a little bit in this, and I know especially because of the students here, we're all very worried about what's going to happen as far as how we're going to decide how we're going back to school. And this is a very politicized issue because the person that is in charge right now, the president, doesn't support staying out of school and staying safe and staying separated. So Annie and Claire and Molly, do you have anything to add about that?
I had a few things to add. I think that also Grace and Derek are part of this discussion too. And I just want to check. Okay, yeah, this slide has changed. Yeah, so I think that something we really want schools to consider is, and I know that, you know, with our school, this is a topic that they are willing to discuss, with just making sure that students and staff are staying safe at all costs. We know that it's scary to think about not going back to school and the impacts of that, especially since our president has threatened to start taking money away from schools who aren't going back. But we really want them to make a promise that they will follow the science no matter what in these circumstances. And we also appreciated the survey that was sent out asking, you know, what parents and students are comfortable with regards to going back to school. But we think that there needs to be one on what resources parents need with regards to childcare, and specifically for the elementary school and also the middle school, because there are parents that need to go back to work who don't have that support. And it's just scary to think about what will happen when they are left to choose between staying home and teaching their kids, making sure they're going to Zoom classes, or going to their job. And that's something that we're really concerned about here. And then also the political effects of COVID-19 and how it can't be talked about as a partisan issue. I know that Grace, you had some points on this, and Derek, if you want to add, please feel free to.
How about Grace, how about you start, and then Derek, you can follow up, if that makes sense.
Okay, so my thoughts aren't as organized, but I did have things I wanted to say about this and how the biggest problem in all of this is that you're politicizing something that politics should never, ever, ever play a part of. Political studies and politics and political parties traditionally, and what they should be limited to, are responses to how to run a government, not what is important and what should be taken into account. It isn't, they don't decide that. They should never decide that. They simply decide, how do we do it? So the idea that in the last few decades, especially, that has become a trend and a theme, that you get to decide what is a human right, what is safe, what is science, and what is true. That's a major problem, and that's a major piece of this, because this is no longer like opinion based or even human right. This is like life or death. That is absolutely terrifying that that has now become an opinion statement. And I think that is one of the biggest factors of it. And that was my point that I was going to talk about, was the political effects that are playing into it, that especially with the whole mask thing, like that is kind of the biggest example, whether you believe you have to wear a mask or not. It's not about you. And I think that is the biggest thing people need to learn. And that's the biggest thing you need to advocate, is that it isn't about you. This is about society as a whole. This is a life or death situation. And politicizing that is, I think, the biggest step in keeping people safe, getting through the pandemic, and fixing things that have been broken. So those are my main thoughts about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Derek?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. That's extremely powerful. I want to add to the conversation around the way that the conversation around reopening schools is happening. As part of the network, the Social Justice Solidarity Net that works, and some folks that we've been organizing with, we're watching how the alt-right militia groups and white nationalists that have been, that were engaging in these armed protests at state capitals around the country, have actually pivoted their organizing toward the reopening of schools. So there's this national level of concern, and the way that that plays out at the state level, at the county level, and then right in our own schools and school districts. But I want to add a different angle too. In the survey that the South Whidbey School District put out to parents about what parents' views of their kids returning to school were, it was really a narrow view, a narrow lens on, do you want to have your kids in front of a screen on Zoom at home, or do you want them to be in a classroom with plexiglass shields? And there's more options than that. And so I really want to introduce the concept of outdoor and nature-based education as a third way that needs to be on the table. It was not represented in the survey that went out last week, and I don't see it strongly in the discourse around how we transform education, or even how we reopen schools. So as Paul mentioned in his introduction, I'm part of E3 Washington, which is a member of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And outdoor and nature-based education is really anywhere outdoors that education can take place. That could be in the school garden, on the school grounds, just anywhere around the school building itself, in the community, in the city, at employers in our community. It could be in nature, even just trails around the community, as well as nature-based education and outdoor education providers, such as on the Olympic Peninsula or in the North Cascades, or anywhere that there are these providers. And so really want to challenge the false binary that kids need to either be in front of a screen in their home or in front of a plexiglass screen in their classroom. And some of the benefits of outdoor education are reduced stress, greater mental and physical health and well-being. Education outcomes are improved. Kids are more engaged. There was a study that showed that students who, a school where they had 50 detentions went from 50 detentions to 0 with the advent of the outdoor education component. And it also addresses equity issues. You know, there's a lot of folks who are going to be challenged by attending they're going to be challenged by attending in classroom in terms of accessibility. And they're also going to be challenged as Grace, I believe you were saying, of, you know, can people access the internet and be on Zoom? And so the outdoor education provides a third way where we can equitably provide educational opportunities. And then also, outdoor education can also open the door toward project-based learning, where students are engaging in addressing some of the issues that we've already started to hear from the youth about their education and where there are holes, and to solve actual community problems, whether those problems be climate mitigation projects, you know, ecological restoration, homelessness, any other social, human, or environmental issues, are all great opportunities to both solve problems and engage in learning. So I'm going to paste a link to a white paper that NAAE put out, which is guidance for reopening schools. It's a easy to read PDF that I encourage folks to read. It incorporates the feedback from 65 community listening sessions nationwide around the topic of reopening schools in the COVID-19 crisis. And you know, I think my just immediate ask is that outdoor and nature-based education be included in high-level conversations about reopening of schools. Thanks. And maybe hand it back to Grace if you had any reactions to this topic.
I can definitely say, as a student, that would help me personally a lot, being able to be outside. I know, like, this is very off topic, but I currently am doing an internship, and I absolutely have to be outside because I cannot get through it being inside in front of a screen for 3.5 hours. I just can't do that. So considering an entire school day and an entire school year, I think that would be very important, and that would be a really good addition to the way schools open back up, would be to take advantage of that possibility. So yes.
I have something to add. A lot, and something that not a lot of you have mentioned, you have mentioned that scientifically, this is going to be really bad for everyone. If schools reopen, it's going to be really dangerous. But what really needs to come across is that a bunch of people will die if they reopen schools, and like, no matter what. Have you ever like been into, I'm assuming that most of you have, but been into like an elementary school classroom? You know how many kids are in that classroom, how many kids that like don't understand about like washing your hands as much, like they'll touch their faces, they walk around like it's like a giant infestation of germs. You know how many of those little kids will die because of this? That's really serious, and that's really like, that needs to be talked about, because people who are campaigning to reopen schools are just, they're neglecting to think about or neglecting to hear the fact that all of these people will die. And sorry, that's just, it's a big deal, and there are solutions, but if schools reopen, it's not going to prevent death. It's not, no matter how many face shields happen, like all of those kids, millions of children across the US will go to school, come back with a virus from each other, transmit it to their entire family, and then that's going to make the problem so much worse. And considering how bad it is right now, that's something that cannot happen. Sorry.
No need to apologize. That is exactly right.
And
This is, go ahead.
can
Go
I
ahead,
add
Grace.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, back to before when we were talking about human rights issues and public health becoming like a matter of, it's a political statement, it's a political issue, that, as I said before, and as Molly, you said and covered really well, was that this is like a life or death matter. You can't treat it as, oh, this is my opinion. Life and death is not an opinion. Illness is not an opinion. This is serious. And if you, no policy make, this is my opinion, if you're making policies, you need to understand that. And yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, absolutely. One example was that I believe the baseball just opened up very recently, and they decided, hey, we're going to be very careful and screen every one of our players and be meticulous and make sure that they're all screened and we know that they don't have COVID before they go out in the field. One game was played, one player got sick, and then I think an entire team caught COVID. And this spreads so quickly that it can't be stopped. Imagine this being in school with kids, like Molly said, that don't know exactly how to be safe, that don't know that they have to wear masks constantly, that want to rebel. Like, imagine how much worse that could be if we weren't actually trying and being even more meticulous than what they were doing. This is not something that like it'll be fine if we're careful. No, this is something that will happen no matter what. Even masks aren't 100% reliable. They are helpful and they will do the job, but they aren't 100%. So it's something that can't be debated. I do want to note that we are going a little bit over time, so just wrapping it up. I think, again, this is something that we could all go on and on about, and we could rant about for like a good week. We could do an entire webinar about this. But yeah, this is an issue that is very dear to our hearts, but we do need to slightly shift focus. The next main point that we're on, Derek, if you could. Yeah, perfect. Human rights issues, so LGBTQ plus within the education system, bullying, and gender identity, sex ed, things like that, that are also very important to our school, that are not getting as much attention as they should, especially because of COVID right now. Molly, Annie, and Claire, if you want to take this away for the next like couple.
Yeah, I'm just gonna start it off. So LGBTQ issues need to be taught about way more. I'm just gonna go right in and talk about how much bullying in our, especially like, you would be shocked about how much LGBTQ bullying is happening even in our school system. I just have some statistics, cannot speak here about this. About 10% of students in schools are LGBTQ, some way or another. That's a very big umbrella term, LGBTQ. So that covers a lot of identities. Adding on to that, an additional 5% of students are questioning their gender identity or their sexuality. And because of that, there are 30% of LGBTQ youth report bullying on school grounds. Now, that is a lot of kids being bullied. And because of that, by the way, all these statistics are coming from the Trevor Project, which is an anti-LGBTQ suicide organization that's been very helpful and has a lot of resources to prevent suicide among LGBTQ youth. But another LGBTQ kids, and now I'm just going to say this is really take this in, are 3 to 5 times more likely to commit suicide. Just take that in. And over 1.8 million youth in between the ages of 13 to 24 who are LGBTQ consider suicide every year. 1.8 million kids. Now, I think, in my opinion, something that we can do to help prevent all of these kids from being bullied is having a greater source of education on gender identity and sexuality in schools. If kids know more about this and understand that it's normal to love who you love no matter what, or to not or to identify as a different gender than you were assigned at birth, and understand that's normal, and have resources to be able to go through that, and have resources to be able to express themselves and understand that they are who they are, and that's fine, and that other people who are maybe straight and cisgendered understand that that's normal too. If we educate on these things, bullies will be less likely to bully others, because as humans, I think I can say with confidence, we bully people that we don't understand. We are more likely to be afraid and fear and be mean to other people who we do not understand, because they're foreign to us. It's scary. Who are they? I don't understand. I've never been through that. What is this? And then those children fear other children, or are don't understand them, and so they are bullied. And because of that, we're dealing with tons and tons of suicides, and tons of tons of kids who have depression. I got another statistic that said that 10.7% of LGBTQ kids reported that they did not go to school because they did not feel safe. The people who are not going to school and getting educated because they do not feel safe in schools, because of who they are, because they are who they are, and that's making them scared to go get an education. And when we go back to school, this really needs to be addressed, because this can't happen anymore. It's been an issue for so long, and we're getting so much better. There are so many rights being there's so many laws being put in place. There's so much activism, but schools need to change how they educate about gender identity, sexual orientation. Annie and Claire, do you guys want to take this somewhere else? I probably have another point I could go rambling on for hours, but yes.
That was so great, Molly. That was really good to hear all of the statistics and everything that you had to say. I personally don't have much to add, and I really don't want to say anything that would take away from everything that you just said, because it was really amazing to hear. But Claire, I think you have one little thing you wanted to bring up. Yeah, I mean, I do believe that some aspects of sex educations should be meant for older audiences, but when it comes to gender identity and sexual orientation, that really needs to start being taught at elementary school level, so that all the way up through school, people are learning and understanding people that maybe have a different gender identity that they were assigned at birth, or a different sexual orientation. It's so important to start at a young age. Yeah, it needs to be an open conversation. Definitely. From day one.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And I also wanted to bring up, I forgot to say this earlier, educating on sex ed for people who are LGBTQ, who identify as gay or lesbian or any other umbrella term. Just so far in my experience, I'm only in middle school, so our sex ed isn't that detailed yet, but they really need to go into more depth about protection and safe sex for people who are in the LGBTQ community, because the AIDS epidemic, that's still something that's going on. It's getting better, but there are a lot of ways that we need to start educating more on that, so that everyone can be safe, not just people who are heterosexual.
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Molly and Annie and Claire, for sharing that out. There is a lot of stigma around this, which is why it hasn't been dealt with and seen as a problem as much as can be spoken about it. So this is really important. It's important to talk about this. It's important to be like, this is something that everybody goes through. This is something that people go through as human beings, and we need to start it at the school system. Molly, if you have like one more thing to add, please do.
Yeah, really quickly.
Also time check.
Sorry, really quickly. We were talking about how facts are turned partisan. So we need to really, I need to really stress that human rights are not political. You cannot say that it's not in your belief that gay people should have rights, because they're people. They're people who deserve as many rights as anyone else. Because if a teacher decides that they won't teach that, or if a court decides that they don't want to put that in and put those educations in place because it's against my belief, that's ridiculous. Everyone deserves the same amount of rights. Everyone deserves the same amount of respect, because everyone is who they are. And it doesn't matter if they love someone different than you love, or if they identify a different way than you and I do. Like, that's fine. Just, you have to be able to give them the rights that they deserve and the education that they deserve. Period. Okay, that's all I got.
Yes. And on that, we are going to end it. Again, something we could go about and rant about for ages. And this is why we're doing this talk. I'm going to pass it off to Jackson now. He's going to talk about Black history and how it's taught in our schools. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna start off talking about hate speech, and this is a problem in our school district. It's a problem for me, and I've heard from a lot of other people of color in my grade and other grades that they've experienced the same things I've experienced. And I have already written a letter to the school about this, and they're trying to change, but not enough in my opinion. What I would like to see is education on hate speech, and not just the N-word, but also like the F-slur and other just hate speech, because people need to learn the difference between hate speech and just swearing, because there's a big difference. And yeah. And another thing that I would like more education about is Black history, obviously. And the sum that I've learned so far in my school experience, I guess, we focus mostly on the good parts, like Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, stuff like that, and not like the hard struggle that was the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement lasted 14 years, and it ended in 1968, and my dad was born in 1967. So it's not that long ago. I feel like people exaggerate how long ago it was. So, yeah. Can everyone still hear me? Something I'd like to see is an ethnic studies class that would cover all of that and more, for not just all people of color in America, not just Black Americans. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackson. And I really appreciate all that you've done with the petition that you sent out as well. I bet that a lot of people who are listening to this have heard about it. If you want to speak out a little bit more about that, by all means do.
Yeah.
I have something that I'd like to add really quickly about what Jackson was saying about hate speech. What's very common right now in our school that I've noticed is things like the D slur being referred to lesbians, and the F slur, and even just using the word gay as something that's derogatory or something that's bad is really detrimental to people who are those things, and that needs to be addressed way more than it is being addressed.
If we have time, I was wondering if I could make another point.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to point out that there is definitely not enough studies on Black history. You basically teach about the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream, and that's kind of it. So I took AP US History this year, which is a college level course, a year-long college level course for people that intend to major in this. And I just this year learned about the whole political process and the whole legal process leading up to everything. And I don't know, maybe I just skipped that or didn't pay attention growing up. I don't know. But I didn't know any of that. Like, I mean, you can say that about a college course. Wow, I didn't know that. But this was like, I hadn't heard any of it. I hadn't heard anything other than who Martin Luther King Jr. was and what the Civil Rights Movement was about. And that is not okay. You should learn about that. You should learn just as much about that. It's recent history and it's very important. And the fact that that isn't taught. You learn more about Christopher Columbus than you learn about the Civil Rights Movement. That is a problem.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel.
I do believe you have more spiel, not specifically towards Black history, but towards ethnic studies. So I'm going to actually pass it off to you again for that. Derek, if you could change the slides, that would be great.
All right, here's my real spiel. Okay, so this is something I care quite a bit about. So I'm going to try and structure it and make it structured because I'm very bad at that. But okay, so I want to talk about immigration status and foreign policy, and I will try and keep it short because I could go on and on and on for a very long time. But this is something I very strongly think that this needs to be part of curriculum. And even if it's not a class, even if you just dedicated one unit in all of your education, that would be better than what we have now. And it is so incredibly important. Just knowing these policies, immigration policies, foreign policies, all you really learn in a civics class and in a history class is US history, US involvement, and wars. There is a whole nother chapter about how do we deal with things. We only learn like, oh, we got in this war because of this. Even taking a college course, I didn't learn any foreign policy. Well, I did, but none of this. So I'm personally passionate about like Latin American history, although everything I'm going to say can relate to most countries, especially third world countries. I've recently started studying more about Africa. I'm sorry, I'm like ranting. I need to actually get on to my points, but many African countries went through the exact same thing. So first of all, I'm going to say the importance of a worldly education. Incredibly important. Okay, I just found my notes. Okay, so worldly education, incredibly important. Empathy is a human skill. It is the ability to function with other humans and connect with them. That is not always, it is not necessarily something you are born with. It is something you have to learn. And the only way to foster that is to teach it in school and make it a part of education. It is human instinct to be xenophobic and to judge other humans that are different than you. The only way you can fix that is teaching empathy. And immigration is one of the biggest policies relating to that. So, and foreign affairs directly affect US policies and our place within the world, and huge aspects of American culture. This isn't teaching some other country's history that has nothing to do with the US. This is US history. It is incredibly important. And I wanted to talk about also, I hope I don't go over time, but I wanted to talk about a few things that I learned that were absolutely shocking, that I have never heard anywhere else. And these things came from my wonderful Spanish teacher, who I think is here, and her going way above and beyond the curriculum to teach us this. And these are very, very important pieces of US history and world history. They shouldn't be an option. These should be something crucial to your education. A few things that I have learned personally that were the most shocking and eye-opening about immigration policy. I'm just going to read off a few facts. I've studied visas and heard about visas, US visas, an incredibly huge topic in US law and policy. I believe, I'm just going off of memory, but I believe there are either 280,000 or 380,000 visas granted per year. That's the quota for relatives of a US citizen are allowed to come over. And a vast majority of those are European and Asian. Very few are Latin American. And there's a visa called a U visa, which is basically an escaping violence visa. If you like need to get out of your country right away, this is the visa specifically for that. The quota is 10,000 per year, as compared to over 30 times that for being a relative to someone. That is not an example of human rights, and we care about people and saving lives. That is, oh, you have a connection here, come on in, compared to, oh, you're gonna die, we'll consider it, we'll consider letting you in. Also, South America has, I believe it's 1/4 of the world's like murder and gang violence, and it is one of the most limited in terms of immigration and foreign policy. That to me is just, you can't say that you're doing these things in the name of human rights and in the names of helping people if you can just ignore that human policy, immigration policies are directly racist and just wrong. And I could go on and on about that, but in schools, I believe that absolutely needs to be something that is taught, because that is a huge deal. And I only heard about it because my teacher went out of her way to teach this. None of this is taught. I have heard things from traveling and from people that came from Latin American countries. They tell you things and it's just common knowledge in their country. And I have never heard these things, ever. And it does concern US history. They can tell me more about US policy than I will ever learn in school. That is a problem. So my main point is, this is something that needs to be taught. It is a huge deal. It's a huge deal just politically and the legal aspect of it, and that is something I care about so much. And at the very least, that should be a piece of education. If you dedicate one unit of one class to teaching this, that is better than what we have now. So I'm going to try not to go on and on. I have one more fact that I think is just awful, is that the typical time to immigrate, just by getting a green card, just by going through the standard process, is the average is 1 to 1.5 years. But if you're coming from Latin America or less privileged countries, it can take 7 to 20. 1 to 1.5 is the average. That says something. Also, the typical waiting time for a U visa is 4.5. These are people escaping domestic violence, gang violence, which until recently, I believe, was not considered a valid reason to be seeking asylum. These are all things I learned because one person in my life decided to teach me this and that it was worth teaching and went above the curriculum. I never would have learned any of this otherwise. And I think that is what I care about. Like, that is, if I could dedicate my life to something, this would be it. And I could go on and on for so long. But
Yeah.
at the very least, you need to teach the basics of this. So
Thank
I'm
you so
going to
much,
stop
Grace.
now because
Thank you for sharing your passion. And this is very, very important. This is something that is, especially right now with everything being very politicized, this is something that is very important in our school system. So thank you so much for sharing your passion. Again, time restraints, I hate them, but we are at our time restraint, unfortunately. So because of that, we're going to move on. Our next topic was women's studies, but because we're running out of time, I think for this specific webinar, it would be a little bit more important to hear what Paul has to share, which is state standards and kind of the law behind what the schools are doing. So because of that, we're going to skip ahead, unfortunately. But know that we're passionate about so many things that this is something that cannot be easily wrapped up into about an hour and a half of learning. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Paul. Go ahead. You can hear me. Derek, can you check?
Yes, Paul is
still
able to speak on our end, so it's really a matter if he has mute on
okay,
Sorry, guys.
there we go.
I just did my whole talk and you missed it. Okay. No. So I don't think you can understand climate change or why we're changing the climate unless you understand slavery. I really don't think so, because we have known we're changing the climate for decades. I mean, you know, my whole lifetime, we've known we're changing, and I'm 60 years old. So the reason we keep changing the climate, that we're continuing down this path, is because of how we consider other people. And we have justified slavery, and we justified taking the lands of the indigenous people that were living here, and we justify taking the environment from our children and our children's children and you guys, simply because, you know, we can. Somehow there's this concept that it's okay to do that, and that is really rooted. It's in the same thing that, you know, where slavery comes from. The idea that there are people that are less than human, and therefore we can exploit them. And so there's a, you know, this is the connection between history and science and the future. And it also explains why we, you know, Trump is trying to force people to go back to school, even though it's going to lead to tremendous amounts of death, because he discounts science, and it's why people elected Trump. So, you know, it all comes back to that. So but that's not what I'm supposed to talk about. I'm supposed to talk about the standards. So in Washington State, they have the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and they create the standards. But it is up to each of the school districts, and there's 295 independent school districts in the state. It's up to them to choose how to meet the standards. And there's no law that says they have to meet the standards. The way it is structured is that the state creates the standards and then creates the test that students have to meet. So if you're going to pass the test, teachers have to address the standards. But how they do that is totally up to them. And so it's good and bad. It's good in that it allows a school and students within a school, if they can get the political voice together, to demand that they actually are taught what they need to learn, they could actually change the curriculum within their school if they have enough political power. If they can get the students all together on it, they get the teachers, and they can impact the school board, which is elected, they can actually have some influence over their curriculum. However, it's bad in that there's 295 separate school districts. And so the chances of any number of them actually adopting the curriculum that people need to learn is pretty low because of the politics in the state. So it's really difficult to change the whole system. So here we are, COVID, and it shut everything down, and people are going online and they're looking for good material, but there's no one the people creating the good material it's all for profit. The state has not pulled people together and, good curriculum developers to develop good materials. They have posted, the Offices of Superintendent Public Instruction has posted materials, but they are not e-learning materials. If you want good e-learning materials, you have to develop them, and businesses have, and they are available at a cost. So it's unfortunate that this is the situation, but this is the reality we live in. Now, one of the standards is the Next Gen Science Standards, and those standards are pretty good, and they're split up into science and engineering, disciplinary core ideas, and cause and effect, or cross-cutting concepts. One of those cross-cutting concepts is cause and effect. And it's great, you do something and there's an impact, but it doesn't capture, when you think of cause and effect in business, you think of the cost and, the cost benefit analysis. And in business, which is pretty much, so that's when you reflect business and Western science, the cost-benefit analysis allows people to ignore what they call externalities. That's anything you don't have to pay for. So a chemical company, a chemist will produce something, the company sells it, a pesticide, it kills lots of, crop-eating pests, but it also kills the bees. That's not their problem. That's an externality. Even though it's going to impact the bees, which impacts pollination, which impacts everybody's food supply, they don't have to pay for it, so it doesn't count in the cost-benefit analysis. So although the standards are great, they really need to be changed and modified so that you really understand the full picture of it. And we're running out of time, and I'll just stop there. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul, for all of that. I also know that we could listen to that and the facts behind that for a long amount of time. It could be an entire webinar. So thank you for summing it up as well as you did. With that, we are basically at time. So what's going to happen is if you have any questions for us, please put them up at the top of your screen. There's a little button that says Q&A. If you put it in there, it'll be easier for us to find. I might have gotten some feedback, but if you put it in there, it's easier for us to find. Derek, any way you could mute Paul for a second? Sorry, there's just a little bit of feedback. So once again, Q&A button up at the top of the screen. Use that, easier to find your questions and your comments. We will be looking through the chat later. However, there's a lot of information in the chat, so it's going to be outside of this official meeting. So again, thank you all for being here. If you have a question, stay. If you want to hear the question, stay. Otherwise, thank you so much. There will be a recording and we will send out follow-up emails to all of you.
There are 2 questions already in the chat, Maggie.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
The Q&A, sorry.
Okay. Dawn, is the process and use of peer review research a topic in the schools? Does anyone want to answer this? Let's see. I know that we have peer-reviewed essays. I know that some of the ways that we kind of work with peer review is through English teachers saying, write out an essay, and then you'll go back through and ask for a student to look at it. But I don't know exactly what that's speaking to, I guess.
Are you speaking to like trying to have the students review curriculum to try to figure out if it's something that they want to be learning?
Because I don't believe students really have any input in that at all, curriculum-wise. Yeah.
Grace, did I hear you mention before, like maybe yesterday, about like having a teacher that did something like that and was trying to like have your voice, students take polls and bring it to the school board?
Yeah, I've had multiple teachers. I know Mr. Nelson is on the school board, so he would he would ask us questions like, oh, what do you think of this? And I don't think he was supposed to, but he did. And then we had Mr. Eager. He's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. He would ask us, like, and he wasn't on the school board, but he, as far as I know, but he wasn't on the school board, so he was very like, if you want this done, I will advocate for it. But other than that, no, you don't have opportunities to, none of your decisions are ever taken into account.
I think that would definitely be a good thing to take into consideration, and I would love if that could be implemented, because I know that students would definitely love to be able to decide what they would like to be learning about, because it is our education.
Absolutely. That actually segues really well into the next question, which is what 3 steps or action steps, small or large, can attendees today make to amplify our voices and our concerns? Does anyone want to speak to this?
I could say something. I think that something that you guys could do, and I would very much appreciate you guys doing, is talking to the school board, going to school board meetings and continuing to tell our stories, like things that you've learned here, continuing to come to meetings like this, come to webinars like this, and continue to support youth voices, because we are the future and we would like to be in charge of our education, and we would like to be in charge of we would like to have our planet be healthy, and there's so many things that our generation is going to have to deal with.
Annie, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with Molly on all of those points. And also just adding on, we are planning to have more webinars covering transforming education in the future. We'll probably do one more in mid to late August, and then another one in September, or there will be some more. So if we could continue to have community support and continue to have community show up to these webinars, it really just makes it a lot better for everyone who is presenting, so that we know that the point is being put across to all of you, and you can go and share it with your friends and family. We also, this upcoming school year, if you can just work on educating yourself on what our school district is doing, that would be great. And, just like staying up to date with current situations, I think we can all agree is really, really important right now. And yeah.
Alrighty, now we have more questions. Joy, okay, answered live.
Can I say something before we move on?
Yes, we are approaching time though, so it needs to be like 30 seconds long
Yes.
or less.
What I want to say is what you guys can definitely do. Continue to amplify our voices, because a lot of the time students, our voices do not get heard and our voices get discounted because of our age. So if you are ever in the position where your voice can be heard and used to amplify ours to actually be used, then do it, because we can't. There's only so much power that we hold in a world that is controlled by adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as people in activism, we're not taken as seriously because we don't know what we should know about the topic, or we haven't learned enough. So that is definitely a very important issue. Sharon, there's one for you. Is the idea of, quote, common-centered self, unquote, part of the connected practice?
I'm sorry, can I hear the question again?
Yeah, if you want to go up into the Q&A, you can see it yourself.
Oh, right, I can see it myself.
Yeah, it might be easier.
Common-centered self, part of the connection practice. We don't use that terminology. I'm guessing yes, but I couldn't say 100% because I haven't used the specific term common-centered self. We do talk about getting more centered and calm within ourselves.
Awesome. And then the next one is Elizabeth asked, can we invite people from across the state to attend your webinars? I think other state level people should be interested in attending. I'll speak to this quickly. Yes, this is something that does not just affect South Whidbey. We can only talk from a South Whidbey perspective, however, so just take that with a grain of salt, but absolutely yes. Awesome. Okay. I don't see any more questions. If you have any Q&A up at the top, chat, we might be able to email you eventually, but other than that, thank you all for being here.